Start to take a look now at the components that are found within blood. Recall once again that blood is a liquid connective tissue, and like all all connective tissues, therefore blood must have an extracellular matrix and also cells. Well, in the case of blood, that extracellular matrix is called plasma. In the case of the cells, and well, to technically be precise, we must also say cell fragments. The cells and cell fragments of blood are collectively called formed elements. The cells and cell fragments are broken up into three major groupings. You'll have red blood cells, white blood cells, and also platelets. So if you take a look at the left-hand side of your screen, this is an image that results once blood is undergoing a process that we call centrifugation. Essentially, a sample of blood is placed into a test tube. That test tube then placed into a machine called a centrifuge. The centrifuge essentially spins around very fast, somewhat like a merry-go-round. This process of spinning ultimately causes all the heavier components within blood to settle out toward the bottom, while all the lighter components remain at the top. At the top, you'll find the plasma, once again the liquid extracellular matrix, and then at the bottom you'll find your collection of formed elements, once again being made up of red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Plasma accounts for roughly 55% of the total blood volume, while the remaining formed elements account for about 45%. Now, we do want to start to take a look at what all is involved in constituting plasma, and we do want to say a few words also additionally about the formed elements. So if you take a look over to the right, once again, you'll see they've kind of in this diagram started to pull out blood being roughly 8% of your total body weight, and then it's broken up into its two major components, plasma and also your formed elements. Once again, plasma accounts for roughly about 55% of your total blood volume. Well, within that 55%, most of it's going to be water. Over 90% of plasma will be water. But then I want to talk next about this box you see toward the bottom that says other solutes, 1.5%. Now there's some specific categories listed over here to the right, but I'm actually going to go ahead and move to table 19.1. And here on table 19.1, we're going to talk specifically about what some of these other solutes will be. Some of these other solutes include various electrolytes. Electrolytes are anything that can be positively or negatively charged. Positively charged electrolytes are called cations. Negatively charged ions are called anions. So you have such ions as sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, chloride, phosphate, sulfate, and also something called bicarbonate, which we'll run across again later in the semester. You'll have various nutrients dissolved in plasma as well. Examples of these include things such as glucose, various amino acids, and fatty acids. Gases as well, oxygen and carbon dioxide being two principal ones, and in some scenarios you may also see nitrogen gas. Regulatory substances like those we talked about during chapter 18, hormones, enzymes as well as vitamins, and then you have various waste products such as urea, ammonia, creatinine, and also bilirubin. So when you go to think about plasma and what all constitutes it, like I said, it's a majority water. But you should absolutely keep in mind some of the specific examples that I mentioned and that are mentioned here in this table, because what I'm likely to do is ask you in some way what is or what is not a part of plasma. And it wouldn't just be as general as the categories. It would ultimately be some of the specific examples from those categories that you would need to keep in mind. Lastly, also within plasma you find plasma proteins. Very significant. The first thing I want you to keep in mind about these plasma proteins is that your liver produces most of them. Many of the plasma proteins being produced by your liver ultimately means that if your liver is not functioning correctly, things can be significantly wrong. And we run across some of those concepts as we go through the rest of the cardiovascular system chapters, but we'll leave that discussion for a later time. The majority of these plasma proteins are called albumins. The albumins, once again, majority of them produced by the liver, are going to be primarily important in helping maintain osmotic pressure. In other words, they're a major factor when it comes to establishing your body's fluid balance. The next category are called globulins. These are much larger proteins. The globulins have a variety of different functions, but probably the most important of them are immunoglobulins. Immunoglobulins are basically antibodies, and these immunoglobulins help protect the body from disease. These globulins can also function as transport proteins in some cases for various other items such as hormones or even other minerals that we need. The final plasma protein, fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is also a large plasma protein whose primary importance is to play a role in blood clotting. So absolutely keep in mind that these plasma proteins, they are vital. Keep in mind also that many of them are produced by the liver, and then you got your three different examples: albumins, globulins, and also fibrinogen. The albumins, their major role is to play a role in setting the body's fluid balance. The globulins, variety of different functions, but I mentioned the immune function as well as the transportation angle to the globulins. And then with fibrinogen, you'll see it again later in this chapter actually, but it plays a significant role in blood clotting. Once again, the other major category that helps comprise blood is going to be the formed elements. The formed elements, once again, broken up into three major subcategories: red blood cells, also known as erythrocytes. The red blood cells / erythrocytes get their name because of their red color. The white blood cells, also known as leukocytes. The white blood cells / leukocytes play a primary role in helping defend the human body against infection and disease. And then we have platelets. Platelets, their primary role is to ultimately play a role in blood clotting. Now, platelets are cell fragments because they do not have a standard nucleus. This is why when you heard me define formed elements, I said that they're the cells and cell fragments. It's because the platelets are not true cells. So platelets are essentially the equivalent of cells that can carry out blood clotting in some animals. They're called thrombocytes. But in the case of the human body, we really don't have a cell, a thrombocyte. We really have a platelet. So sometimes we kind of switch the name thrombocyte in for platelet. It's really more of a misnomer because cyte implies cell, but you just have to kind of be aware of it. It does come up occasionally that thrombocytes equal platelets. So like I said, just kind of know that it's a misnomer from the standpoint that platelets are not true cells. So platelets involved in blood clotting, white blood cells involved in defense or immune functioning for the body, and then red blood cells, well, I didn't tell you what their function is. Their primary function is to carry gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide mainly, but it can be some alternative gases in certain situations, like carbon monoxide poisoning. When an individual suffers from carbon monoxide poisoning, instead of having red blood cells carry oxygen, they actually begin to pick up carbon dioxide, which is obviously a significant issue. Now, we do want to talk about the 5 different types of white blood cells. We will revisit these later when we actually have our white blood cell discussion. But you can see the dominant member of the white blood cell grouping is going to be neutrophils. In the average healthy individual, they're anywhere from 60 to 70% of the total white blood cell count. Next up would be lymphocytes. Lymphocytes accounting for 20 to 25%, followed by monocytes who account for 3 to 8%, eosinophils who account for 2 to 4%, and then basophils usually right around 1%. You definitely need to keep in mind the order in which these cells are seen from the most to the least numerous. There's a nice little mnemonic that typically most people learn in order to keep these straight. It goes: never let monkeys eat bananas. The N, never, for neutrophils, the most numerous. Let, for lymphocytes, the second most numerous. Monkeys, monocytes, eat, eosinophils, bananas, basophils. So never let monkeys eat bananas keeps the order of the white blood cells correct for you, at least as far as the first letter, from the most to the least numerous. Finally, we want to say a couple more words here about red blood cells. For most people, what we usually do when we have a sample of blood analyzed, we like to find out something called a hematocrit. It's part of what we call, for short, a CBC. A CBC is a complete blood count. Well, hematocrit is the percentage of red blood cells that are present in an individual's blood as a function of the entire blood volume. Now, the hematocrit for a man is usually a little bit greater than that of a woman. But regardless, if we take a look at it, for a woman, that hematocrit is usually about 42%, and for a man, it's usually about 47%. So just a little under, give or take, half of the entire blood volume is made up of red blood cells. If the hematocrit is low, then that person would technically have what we call an anemia. They would have a decreased ability to carry oxygen, and that could potentially cause problems. The opposite of a low hematocrit is an elevated hematocrit. An elevated hematocrit typically is defined as a polycythemia. A polycythemia can cause significant issues because when you have a greater number or elevated hematocrit, a greater number of red blood cells, it means that the blood becomes more viscous, more thick. And thicker blood is harder to move, it's harder to pump, and it can cause significant vascular issues such as strokes, heart attacks, and things of that nature. So keep in mind what a hematocrit is. Like I said, it's the percentage of red blood cells as a function of the entire blood volume.